My name is Wanda Ingram, and I'm 34 years old. Last summer, I walked into my parents' house in Desert Ridge, Phoenix, my heart pounding, ready to share two pieces of news I thought would finally make them proud. The dining room buzzed with chatter. My parents, my older brother, and my sister, all seated with their usual smug expressions. I took a deep breath, about to speak, when my father's voice cut through like a blade. The room went silent. My mother smirked. My sister's lips curled into a mocking grin. Every eye was on me. In that moment, I could have fought back, shouted, demanded respect. Instead, I chose something else, a slow, deliberate smile that made their expressions falter. Without a word, I stood, picked up my purse, and walked out into the warm Arizona night. That night, I made one decision. Simple, but powerful enough to flip everything upside down, and none of them were prepared for what came next. What about you? If you were in my place, would you stay silent or fight back? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. Growing up in our family's house in Desert Ridge, Phoenix, I always felt like the odd one out. My older brother, Stephen, was the golden child, a software engineer who could do no wrong. My older sister, Cheryl, was the princess, a real estate lawyer with a flashy office downtown. Then there was me, Wanda, the middle kid, scraping by in their shadows. My parents, especially my dad, James, never let me forget it. They'd gush over Stephen's tech awards or Cheryl's latest property deal, but my work, organizing events, weddings, corporate galas, charity fundraisers barely registered. "That's cute, Wanda," my mom, Diane, would say, her tone dripping with dismissal. "But when are you going to get a real job?" I'd bite my tongue, knowing they didn't see the late nights I pulled coordinating vendors or the clients who raved about my work. Despite their indifference, I'd carved out a solid career. By 34, I'd climbed to project manager at a top event planning firm in Phoenix. Last spring, my boss called me into her office, grinning. "Wanda, you've been killing it," she said, handing me a promotion letter, senior project manager, with a raise that pushed my savings into six figures. I was thrilled, not just for the title, but for what it meant I'd done this on my own. Then there was Evan, my fiancé, a history teacher who made me laugh like no one else. We'd gotten engaged a month before, picking out a simple ring that felt like us. I couldn't wait to tell my family, hoping foolishly maybe that this time they'd see me. But hope came with a knot in my stomach. Family dinners at our Desert Ridge house were never just about food. They were a stage for my dad to praise Stephen's latest app launch or Cheryl's $1 million condo deal while I sat there invisible. I'd been helping them for years, writing checks to cover their bills when things got tight, like the $1,500 a month for their mortgage or the $3,000 for my dad's heart surgery. They never asked how I managed it. They just took. My grandfather Edward was the only one who ever noticed. "You're doing too much for them, kid," he'd say, shaking his head during our Sunday calls. I brushed it off, thinking family was supposed to stick together. That summer, I drove to their house, my promotion letter tucked in my purse, Evan's ring glinting on my finger. I'd planned every detail of what I'd say, the promotion, the engagement, the life I was building. Maybe this time I thought they'd look at me and see someone worth celebrating. But as I parked in their driveway, my heart sank. I could already hear my dad's voice through the open window boasting about Stephen's new startup. Cheryl's laugh followed, sharp and smug. My mom's voice chimed in, praising Cheryl's latest court win. I gripped the steering wheel, fighting the familiar dread. Would they even care about my news? Or would they find a way to twist it to make me feel small again? I'd spent years swallowing their jabs, comments about my frivolous job, my quiet life compared to my siblings' shining careers. Stephen, with his tech bro swagger, never bothered to ask about my work. Cheryl, always in designer suits, would roll her eyes when I mentioned a client's event. My parents didn't just ignore me. They leaned on me, expecting money, whenever their budget fell short. I'd paid $5,000 for Cheryl's law school fees back when she was struggling to finish her degree. They never thanked me, never acknowledged it. Yet I kept hoping, kept showing up, kept believing one dinner could change things. I spent that afternoon in my apartment, putting the final touches on a gift I'd poured my heart into. For weeks, I'd been working on a family photo album, decades of memories from grainy shots of my parents' wedding to Polaroids of U.S. kids in the Desert Ridge backyard. I'd stayed up late gluing snapshots, writing captions, decorating pages with stickers. It wasn't just a gift. It was my way of saying I valued our family, even if they rarely valued me. I wanted to give it to my mom and dad before dinner, hoping it would set a warm tone for my big announcements, my promotion to senior project manager, and my engagement to Evan. As I wrapped the album in gold paper, I pictured their faces lighting up, maybe even a "We're proud of you, Wanda," from my dad, James. But as I walked into their Desert Ridge house, that hope started to fray. The living room was already alive with voices. My dad stood by the fireplace, gesturing animatedly as he told a neighbor on the phone about my brother Stephen landing a big contract for his tech startup. "He's going places," James said, his voice booming with pride. I set the album on the coffee table, waiting for a chance to speak, but he didn't even glance my way. My mom, Diane, was in the kitchen chatting with my sister Cheryl about her latest real estate deal, a luxury condo sale that had her name in the Phoenix Business Journal. "You're unstoppable," Diane said, beaming as Cheryl laughed and flipped her hair. I hovered nearby, clutching the wrapped album, trying to join the conversation. "Hey, Mom, I brought something for you and Dad," I said, holding up the gift. Diane barely looked up. "That's nice. Wanda just put it somewhere," she said, turning back to Cheryl. I swallowed the sting and moved to the dining room where Stephen was scrolling through his phone, probably checking stock prices for his company. "Hey, Stephen," I said, forcing a smile. "I made something for the family want to see." He grunted, eyes glued to his screen. "Later, maybe," he said, not even looking up. I stood there feeling like a kid again, begging for scraps of attention. The album felt heavier in my hands, my excitement fading. I set it on the sideboard, telling myself dinner would be different. I'd share my news, and they'd have to listen. As I helped Diane set the table, the conversation kept circling back to my siblings. James joined us, still on about Stephen's startup. "He's pitching to investors next week," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Could be a game changer." Diane nodded, placing a platter of roasted chicken down. "And Cheryl closed that condo deal in under a month," she added, her voice brimming with awe. I tried to chime in. "That's great, but I've got some news too," I started, but Cheryl cut me off, launching into a story about her celebrity client. I gripped a fork, my knuckles whitening, and forced a nod. They didn't even notice. I took a deep breath, reminding myself why I was here. The promotion meant I was running major events, now galas, conventions, even a citywide festival. Evan, my rock, had proposed under a starry desert sky, promising a life where I'd never feel small. I deserved to share that. But as I watched my family, their voices overlapping with praise for Stephen's coding genius and Cheryl's courtroom wines, doubt crept in. Would they care about my world, or would they brush it off like they always did? The tension grew as we sat down for dinner. James carved the chicken, still talking about Stephen's latest app. Cheryl sipped her wine, smirking as Diane listed her recent accolades. I sat across from them, the album untouched on the sideboard, my news burning in my throat. I told myself to stay calm, to wait for the right moment. Maybe when I handed them the album, they'd see me differently. Maybe my promotion, my engagement, would finally make them pause. Dinner was moments away, and I clung to that fragile hope. Dinner had just begun. I sat at the table, my pulse quickening as I prepared to share my news. The clink of forks and chatter filled the room, but I was ready. My promotion to senior project manager and my engagement to Evan were milestones I'd earned, and I wanted my family to know. I took a deep breath, fingers grazing the ring hidden under the table. "Everyone, I have something to tell you," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. Heads turned. James, my dad, mid-bite. Diane, my mom, holding a glass of wine. Cheryl, my sister, raising an eyebrow. Stephen, my brother, glancing up from his phone. For a moment, I had their attention, and my heart lifted. I got promoted to senior project manager. I started, and Evan and I are James, slammed his fork down the sound, sharp enough to stop me cold. "You're the most useless child in this house, Wanda," he said, his voice dripping with scorn. "Planning parties. That's not a real job. Why can't you be like Stephen or Cheryl?" Diane's lips curled into a smirk, her eyes glinting with amusement. Cheryl let out a biting laugh, leaning back in her chair. Stephen didn't speak, but a faint grin flickered across his face. The words landed like a slap, each one carrying years of their disregard, their refusal to see me. My chest tightened, the air heavy with their judgment. I could have fought back, listed every high-profile event I'd managed, every client who'd called me indispensable. I could have told them about the nights I'd spent perfecting proposals, or how Evan saw the strength they ignored. But their expressions, James's glare, Diane's smirk, Cheryl's mocking laugh, made it clear they'd never care. Something snapped inside me, not anger, but resolve. I didn't need their validation anymore. I smiled slow and deliberate, watching Diane's smirk waver and Cheryl's laugh falter. The room went quiet, their eyes locked on me. Without a word, I pushed my chair back, the scrape echoing in the silence. I stood, grabbed my purse, and headed for the door. "Wanda, where are you going?" James called, his voice edged with confusion. I didn't look back. The front door shut behind me, the sound final. In my car, the warm Arizona night pressed against the windows. My hands trembled, not from hurt, but from a clarity I'd never felt before. For years, I'd kept their lives afloat, $1,500 a month to save their house from foreclosure money they'd taken without a single thank you. That ended now. I pulled out my phone, typed a message to James and Diane. No more money. Good luck. My finger hit send without hesitation. Then I powered off my phone, the screen fading to black as I tossed it aside. They could deal with the consequences. As I drove away from Desert Ridge, my smile held. I wasn't escaping. I was choosing myself. Evan was waiting at home, ready to build a future where I was enough. The road ahead felt open, unburdened by their expectations. I'd carried them for too long, and now I was free. The night stretched on, and I was ready to move forward. The next morning, sunlight slipped through my curtains, pulling me from a restless night. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up 42 missed calls from my mom, spanning from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. And in the middle of it, all one message from my dad stood out. Please sent at 3:00 a.m. My stomach twisted, not with guilt, but with a strange calm. They'd seen my message, the one I'd sent before leaving Desert Ridge. No more money. Good luck. I didn't expect their panic, but I wasn't surprised either. I typed a quick reply to James. Useless is busy. Then I paused, fingers hovering over the screen. They needed to know the truth. I opened our family group chat. James, Diane, Cheryl, Stephen, and started typing. Since you think I'm useless, I wrote, let's clear something up. For years, I've paid $1,500 a month to cover your mortgage. I paid $3,000 for Dad's heart surgery last year. And Cheryl, I covered $5,000 of your law school fees when you were struggling. You're welcome. I hit send, the words sharp and final. I didn't wait for a reply. I set my phone to do not disturb and got ready for the day, feeling lighter than I had in years. By noon, my phone buzzed with a call from my grandfather, Edward. I answered his familiar voice, warm but firm. Wanda, I saw your message, he said. Good for you, kid. I'm proud you stood up. He didn't stop there. He'd called James and Diane that morning, tearing into them. You've been bleeding her dry, he told them, his tone sharp enough to cut through their excuses. She's been carrying this family, and you call her useless. Shame on you both. I could picture Diane's face pale and scrambling for words, James muttering defenses that wouldn't hold. Edward wasn't done. You need to figure out how to survive without her, he said, hanging up on them. I thanked him, my voice catching. You don't owe them anything, Wanda, he said. Keep shining. Back at the Desert Ridge house, my message had lit a fuse. Diane was frantic, pacing the kitchen, calling James over and over, demanding he fix this. How are we supposed to pay the mortgage now? She snapped, her voice, trembling. James, usually so composed, shouted back, You think I know? She can't just cut us off. Cheryl, who'd always acted untouchable, was stunned into silence, her law school debt. My contribution now, a glaring truth. Stephen, who'd taken my support for his startup without question, stared at his phone, rereading my words. $5,000. Cheryl finally said, her voice tight. She never told me. Stephen shook his head. She didn't tell any of us. The realization hit them hard, and I'd been their safety net, and they'd mocked me for it. The house erupted into chaos. Diane blamed James for pushing me away. You called her useless, she yelled, her hands shaking as she clutched her phone. James fired back. You laughed, Diane. Don't act innocent. Cheryl, usually quick to defend herself, snapped at Stephen. You knew she was helping, didn't you? Stephen denied it. His face flushed. I thought it was a loan, he shouted. The truth I'd laid bare tore through their carefully built image of me as the family's failure. They weren't just shocked. They were humiliated, forced to face how much they'd relied on the daughter they'd dismissed. I didn't see their fight, but Edward filled me in later that day. They're tearing each other apart, he said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. I didn't gloat. I felt steady, grounded. My message wasn't just a statement, it was a line in the sand. I'd spent years propping them up, but I was done being invisible. As I sipped my coffee, I thought of Evan, of the life we were building. The family's chaos was theirs to handle now. The day was far from over, and the reckoning was just beginning. 3 weeks had passed. I was at my desk planning a corporate gala when my phone vibrated with a text from Evan. You okay? He asked, knowing I'd been dodging calls from Desert Ridge. I hadn't spoken to my family since the night I walked out, and I wasn't ready to. My boundaries were set, and I meant to keep them. Meanwhile, the consequences of my decision were hitting my family hard, unraveling their carefully curated lives in ways I'd only half expected. At their house, a certified letter arrived, stamped with bold red letters, final notice of foreclosure. My dad, James, ripped it open, his hands shaking as he read the bank's warning. Without my $1,500 a month, they'd missed 2 mortgage payments, and the bank was done waiting. Diane, my mom, clutched the letter, her voice rising in panic. We need to call Wanda, she said, dialing my number for the 100th time. It went straight to voicemail. My phone was still on. Do not disturb. James paced the living room, muttering about selling his car, his pride stung by the reality of their debt. They'd relied on me for years, never imagining I'd actually stop. My sister Cheryl was reeling too. Her real estate business, always propped up by her flashy reputation, took a hit when a major condo deal fell through. She'd counted on a quick sale to fund her next project, but without my financial support money, she'd never acknowledged she couldn't cover the upfront costs. The client walked, and Cheryl's name, once golden in Phoenix circles, started to lose its shine. She spent hours on the phone begging investors to stay her voice tight with desperation. I just need a little more time, she pleaded, but the damage was done. Stephen, my brother, wasn't faring much better. His tech startup, once his ticket to glory, was drowning in debt. To keep it afloat, he'd taken a second job working overnight shifts at a data center. The long hours left him exhausted, his usual swagger replaced by dark circles under his eyes. He'd assumed my contributions were endless, never questioning where the money came from. Now faced with loan payments he couldn't meet, he was scrambling his dreams, teetering on the edge. The family's breaking point came during a group call organized by my grandfather Edward. He'd had enough of their excuses and insisted everyone join James, Diane, Cheryl, Stephen. I wasn't invited, and I wouldn't have answered anyway. Edward's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and unyielding. You've lost Wanda because of your arrogance. He said his words aimed at James and Diane. She paid your bills, kept your house funded, your lives, and you treated her like nothing. You're reaping what you sowed. James tried to interrupt, stammering about family loyalty, but Edward cut him off. Loyalty? You called her useless. You don't deserve her. Diane's voice wavered, pleading ignorance, but Edward wasn't having it. You knew exactly what she was doing for you, he said. Now fix your own mess. The call turned into a shouting match. Cheryl accused James of driving me away with his insults. You always favored Stephen. She snapped, her frustration spilling over. Stephen shot back. Don't pin this on me. You took her money too. Diane tried to play peacemaker, but her voice cracked as she admitted they couldn't afford the house without me. James, red-faced, yelled at everyone to shut up, but no one listened. Edward hung up, leaving them to stew in their chaos. He later told me it was the loudest call he'd ever heard, and he didn't regret a word. I stayed out of it, ignoring the voicemails piling up from Diane, the texts from Cheryl, begging to talk. I'd spent years bending over backward for them, only to be dismissed. Now I was focused on my life, my career thriving with new clients, my engagement to Evan, who reminded me daily that I was enough. My boundaries weren't just a line, they were a wall, and I wasn't tearing it down. Their world was crumbling, but mine was just beginning. Months had slipped by. I stood in the empty living room of our new home, a cozy two-bedroom in Scottsdale, the smell of fresh paint still lingering. Evan was outside unloading boxes from the moving truck, his laughter echoing as he joked with the movers. My phone, once buzzing with desperate calls from my family, was quiet now. I'd blocked James, Diane, Cheryl, and Stephen weeks ago, of their voicemails and texts fading into a past I no longer carried. My life felt like my own for the first time, unburdened by their expectations, their judgment, their weight. At work, I'd just been named Director of Projects, a role I'd earned through years of late nights and flawless events. My team looked to me for guidance, trusting my vision for everything from charity galas to tech conferences. The promotion came with a raise enough to cover the down payment on our new house. Evan and I had spent weeks house hunting, dreaming of a place where we could build our future. We'd founded a sunny corner lot with a small backyard, perfect for quiet evenings and maybe someday a family of our own. As I arranged books on a shelf, I caught my reflection in a window. I was smiling truly. Smiling, not the forced kind I'd worn for years. The only tie to my old life was my grandfather, Edward. He didn't call often. His hands shook too much to hold a phone for long, but his letters arrived every few weeks handwritten on crisp stationery. "You're doing right by yourself, Wanda," he wrote in his latest one, his cursive steady despite his age. "I've always seen your strength, even when they didn't. Keep going." I kept his letters in a wooden box on my desk, each one a reminder that someone in my family believed in me. I'd write back sharing bits of my life, my promotion, the house Evan's proposal under the desert stars. Edward's replies were short but warm, always ending with, "I'm proud of you, kid." My family in Desert Ridge was a distant memory. I didn't know if they'd lost the house, if Cheryl had salvaged her business, or if Stephen was still burning out on night shifts. I didn't check, didn't ask. Edward never mentioned them in his letters, and I was grateful for that. Their chaos wasn't my responsibility anymore. I'd spent years pouring money and energy into their lives only to be called useless. Now, every dollar I earned, every moment I had, was for me, for us. Evan and I were planning our wedding, a small ceremony with friends who saw me for who I was not, who I wasn't. Sometimes late at night, I'd think about the past, not with regret, but with clarity. I'd given my family everything, and they'd given me nothing but criticism. Cutting them off wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming my worth. I'd built a career, I loved a home with the man I'd marry, a life that felt full. The weight of their dismissal, their need, their scorn, it was gone. In its place was a confidence I hadn't known. I could feel a certainty that I was enough. I walked outside to join Evan, the Arizona sun warm on my face. He handed me a box labeled kitchen, grinning as he teased me about my terrible packing skills. I laughed, shoving him playfully. And for a moment, the world was just us, our new home, our new life. Edward's latest letter sat on the counter inside a quiet anchor to the family I'd chosen to keep. The rest I'd let go. My days were full, and I was ready for whatever came next. The wedding day arrived. I stood in a flowing white dress, the desert sunset casting a warm glow over our Scottsdale backyard. Evan waited at the makeshift altar, his smile steady and sure, surrounded by twinkle lights and a handful of close friends. My grandfather Edward sat in the front row, his eyes misty but proud, the only family member I'd invited. James, Diane, Cheryl, and Stephen weren't here. Not because I'd wavered, but because I hadn't. This day was for me, for Evan, for the life we'd built without their shadows. As I walked toward Evan, gripping a bouquet of wildflowers, I felt weightless, free, in a way I'd never known. "Wanda," Evan whispered as I reached him, "you're everything." I squeezed his hand, my heart full. Edward clapped softly, his weathered hands trembling but strong in spirit. "You look beautiful, kid," he said, his voice carrying over the quiet hum of music. The ceremony was simple vows we'd written ourselves, promises of love and partnership, no trace of the past I'd left behind. Our friends cheered as we kissed the sound, bright and unburdened. For the first time, I wasn't proving anything to anyone. I was just living. Word reached me later through a mutual friend about my family's collapse. James and Diane had lost their Desert Ridge home, forced to downsize to a cramped apartment on the edge of Phoenix. The bank had foreclosed, their savings drained, without my monthly contributions. Cheryl's real estate empire had crumbled her name once, synonymous with success, now whispered in professional circles as a cautionary tale. She'd lost more clients, her confidence shattered by deals she couldn't fund. Stephen, buried under startup debt, was still grinding through night shifts, his dreams of tech stardom fading with every unpaid bill. I didn't feel triumph, only a quiet acknowledgement that their choices had led them here. I'd learned something they never would. Loving yourself means drawing a line. For years, I'd poured my energy, my money, my heart into a family that saw me as less. I'd paid their mortgage, their medical bills, their tuition, only to be mocked, dismissed, called useless. Walking away wasn't just about cutting ties. It was about choosing me. Setting boundaries didn't make me selfish. It made me whole. Every step I'd taken since my career soaring as a project director, my home with Evan, my peace, came from that choice. I wasn't running from them. I was running toward myself. Edward's presence at the wedding reminded me of what family could be. Someone who saw my worth, who celebrated me without conditions. His letters, still arriving every few weeks, were my anchor proof that love didn't have to hurt. As I danced with Evan under the stars, I felt a truth settle in my bones. Happiness comes when you stop begging for approval and start building a life that's yours. I want to leave you with this. If you've ever felt unseen, unvalued, or trapped by those who should lift you up, know that you can choose yourself. Say no. Walk away. Build a life that makes you proud. Share your story with me. How did you find your strength? What boundaries did you set to reclaim your life?